The Spotlight, shining a light on podcasts and videos that have caught our attention.
Hi and welcome to The Spotlight. I'm Jen Spiker and today I have something special to share with you. Unsung Hero is coming to Aussie cinemas this month. It's the story of David and Helen Smallbone, the parents of Rebecca St. James and Joel and Luke from For King and Country. The film is set in the late 80s and Vision CEO Phil Edwards has a unique connection to the story because he worked for David Smallbone as a tour manager with his Christian music promotion business. Unfortunately, David's business failed, and today we'll hear the conclusion of Jackie Malilly's conversation with Phil, picking up at that point in the story.
The Spotlight with Jen Spiker.
And then with David's company collapsing, there was that difficulty of walking in faith, and then something like this happens, which was quite devastating for them. And then they did that big leap to America, leap of faith, really. And then we talk a lot. We live by faith every day, don't we? So can you give us a bit of an idea of how all that was there? Because you were there at that time.
Well, this is all the subject of the movie Unsung Hero, what happened to them at that time. And it was a tour that we did with Amy Grant around Australia, and it was a big tour by our standards, small by the standards of the other big artists of the day, the Billy Joels and so on. But it was a big tour, the Sydney Entertainment Centre, the Tennis Centre in Melbourne, the Brisbane Entertainment Centre and others around the country. Big touring entourage, a band, full band and production people and everything else. I think there was 20-something people in the touring entourage, big costs. Unfortunately, it just bombed. And as I reflect on it, there were a few things that converged. If you remember, there was the recession that we had to have, according to our then Prime Minister. And I think things were tight for people. The ticket prices were more than what people were used to paying. And at the time, I think it was when Amy Grant was crossing over from being, a really, obvious, overt Christian artist to being more in the mainstream. And she'd had an album that came out that had some hits on it, good songs. Baby Baby went, I think, number 1 or 2 in Australia at the time, but it wasn't really enough to pull a new crowd. And so perhaps there were some people that didn't turn up because, they didn't like the direction she was going. So the sum of all of that was that David's business couldn't sustain the loss. It was hundreds of thousands of dollars that were lost, and it was very, very tough for them. I guess I was to some extent in the middle of it, but the worst thing that happened for me was I was out of a job. For them, it was harrowing, very difficult. And I know David took it very hard. He felt a failure to his family, a failure potentially as a man, perhaps a failure before God. You'd have to ask him about those things, but I know it hit him really hard. And when they went to America on the promise of, another job that fell through, when they got there with very little money in their pocket, and they knew some people, so I guess that helped. It really forced them into that faith space, and I love that. The movie. I've had the opportunity to see the movie, and I recommend it heartily. It's pretty faithful to the story. I think they've captured the characters and the story really well. But it is an inspirational story of faith, and I often think about things like this as being a bit like. You can see a train going past, or perhaps you can see a parade, and you only get to see the bit of the train or the parade from where you're standing. But God sees the whole thing. He's got the helicopter view up here and can see the train from start to finish. He can see where the track is going, where it's come from. And I think the challenge for us is, we're in the middle of that, a tough time, a dark tunnel perhaps, and we can't see where the future is. Faith is the bit that actually says, God, I trust you in this. I know you can see the destination, even though I can't right now. And I think that was their journey. And one thing led to another for them. They knuckled down, they worked hard, they pulled together as a family, and that's very much what the movie's about. Their family, and Helen in particular. She's an amazing lady. She's just an inspiration. And the movie itself has a great title, Unsung Hero. It really wraps up Helen, I think.
Yes, I read Helen's book and I found it really very insightful, but she's so honest about how difficult it was. Just the whole, not just the whole journey, but even once they got a breakthrough, the touring, everything. They did everything together as a family. She homeschooled them from the tour buses. It was incredible. Like their faith of just, I found it really inspiring. So I can't wait to see the movie because I think it's, I've had everyone that's seen it, the previews that you saw raved about it and said it was fantastic. So I just think it inspire people with their faith just to know that even though disasters happen, God, if you persist and just hold on tight, just brings you through. And I can't wait to see it.
Well, you'll enjoy it when you do.
Right. And you've kept a friendship with David.
Yes, I have. Yes.
Really
We
good.
keep in contact now and again through email, and it's been great to be able to see them. And I've actually been to their house in the US and different things. So they're good friends.
Were they the only Christian concert promoters at the time? Like once they went, what happened to Christian music after that?
There were a couple of others. There were probably two main groups that were doing Christian touring at the time. Another gentleman named Alan Kennedy, who was touring a lot of artists on the Sparrow label and others. And there was other activity going on. They certainly weren't the only ones, but they were doing some significant tours and also album releases as well. There were a number of independent Australian artists. We actually released the very, very first Hillsong album. It was a cassette-only release, I think in about 1989, 88, 89, somewhere there, called Spirit and Truth. And we did some live recordings with Youth Alive New South Wales and Victoria, and a number of other band recordings. And, of course, Rebecca St. James, David and Helen's daughter, she actually recorded her very first album here in Australia before they went to America because
13.
She was 13, and under the name of Rebecca Jean. And that was a pretty brave move. I thought that it would indicated, here's some parents who saw potential in their daughter and invested in recording this album. It cost them quite a bit of money, and it was really so that they would have something to then try and go and get a record deal somewhere else, which took a long time, but it happened.
Yeah, that's great. What happened with your career path after that?
Well, like a lot of things, when you've got some external factor that forces you to change, it opens up other opportunity. And so for me, I fell pretty quickly into other just casual work to pay the bills. I think I was laying turf for a few weeks and things like that, working on a farm. And then I had a phone call from a friend who worked at a commercial radio station who I knew through David and Helen, good friends of theirs. A guy named John O'Donnell. Hi, John, if you're watching this, who called me one day. He was working at a commercial station in Newcastle and said, there's a job going here in advertising sales, and I know that you've always been interested in radio, and I see potential in you and happy to put in a good word if you're interested in applying, which he must have done because I got the job. And so, that started, it was in early 92, and I started in commercial radio, and that then led to a career over 10 years at various commercial stations, initially in sales, which was only for a fairly short time, then on air, and then as a music director and a program director. But at the end of that time, I was just feeling like there's really something more significant that I need to be doing with more meaning to it. And I was drawn toward Christian media, and that took me to New Zealand. My wife and I and kids went over there for about 3 years and worked with REMA in New Zealand, which is a fairly long-established and reasonably large organisation, overseeing their programming for that 3 radio networks there, and I had a little bit to do with the TV network that we started while I was there, and then came to Vision, where I am today. That was 20 years ago, and for the first 10 years was in programming-related roles, and then about 10 years ago, the board invited me to consider becoming the CEO, which I said, sure, I'll have a crack at that, and 10 years later, here I am still here.
Fantastic. And yes, congratulations. That's excellent. I was going to ask as well as regarding Christian musicians who are wanting to break into the industry today. What would you give as far as any advice for them? Sometimes that faith journey, you think you really believe God's put you in, the role that you're doing, and things sometimes don't work out. What happened with the small bones? You must be questioning what happened. So I know it's really tough, and for them to keep persisting, or there might be a time when, how do you know when it's time to quit? or it's not right, what advice would you give? No, that's a long question.
No, that's fine. I think the thing I would recommend to anybody who's wanting to pursue something in any creative industry, so whether it's music or on the radio or on television or writing or anything that's creative, is first of all, follow your passions. Secondly, understand that there is a standard that you actually need to step up to. So try and be objective about where you're at. A lot of people think that their stuff's really good, but the other people listening, watching, reading, they might not share that same opinion. So try and just be really realistic about where you're at. And then thirdly, figure out, what do I need to do to increase my craft and to hone my skill? What other people do I need to be exposed to? Who's been there before me? And stay humble in the whole process. And one of the challenging things with creative people often is there is a bit of ego. You know, we tend to be have a great opinion of ourselves. Well, try and be humble. I think that's a great piece of advice for anybody anywhere. Be humble, keep your eyes toward God, and then take opportunities when they come. Don't be afraid. Step out and be led by God. So probably good advice for anybody.
And expect a long journey.
That's right.
Because it takes a long time. Everyone thinks there's overnight successes, but they really might take 10, 20 years sometimes.
That is so true. You know, I don't think there is such a thing as an overnight success. There are always contributing factors that led, even if somebody who has sort of risen quite quickly, there's a foundation that they've built on that has projected them to that space. I think one of the other things to be realistic about too is I've heard someone say many years ago something that's really stuck in my mind that kind of goes in line with how tough it can be, and that is in Christian music in particular, and you can apply this to other things too, but if you want to end up with a small fortune from Christian music, then start with a large fortune, because it's a great way to lose money.
That's so true. So do you have an unsung hero, Phil?
I've been thinking about that question. I'd say, certainly my mother would be up there. She was an amazing lady. Went to be with the Lord in the mid-90s, and I've got great memories of her. Memories of her playing at the piano with this old pianola. You remember those? You put the paper roll in, pedal away. That was my playing. But she'd sit there and she'd play, hymns like "Great Is Thy Faithfulness." She'd sing along to that, and she was a woman of faith. And it was a tough journey for her too, because my dad passed away in the early 80s. So, she was a single mum with 6 kids herself from that point on. But she had good people around her, and she had trust and faith in God. So I think she'd get my nomination.
Good old mum. Yes. Mum's great. That's great. Thank you so much, Phil, for your time. I really appreciate it, and it was fantastic hearing your story.
Thanks, Jackie.
On the Spotlight, we've been listening to a conversation between Jackie Malili and Vision CEO Phil Edwards. You won't see Phil in the Unsung Hero movie, but you will see an amazing story of God's faithfulness to a family that clung to him through a very challenging time. Unsung Hero hits the big screen on May 30, and you can see a list of cinemas showing the film at faithmedia.com.au. My name is Jen Spiker, and I look forward to joining you next time on The Spotlight with another podcast or video worth highlighting.
For more great podcasts and videos like the one featured today, check out vision.org.au or the free Vision app.